Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, AirspeedPrime here with my next Avatar and Korra video. This is going to be my Avatar vs Korra, which is better and for what reasons video. So this is going to be the big conclusion to a series of 3 videos, but I suppose you could also say it's a conclusion to a series of 116 videos when you include the Avatar rewatch I did, reviewing all 61 episodes, the Korra rewatch I did, reviewing all 52 episodes, plus the last 2 videos, part of the 3 I mentioned, my Korra episode ranking list and my Avatar episode ranking list. This is the last video in that series to really come to a conclusion after doing all of those reviews, all of the episode ranking list, which is the better series. So I would highly recommend that you at least check out the 2 list videos, because it will help you with regards to what I'm doing here in this video. As you can see here, how this video will work. How will we come to a conclusion about which series is better? So we're basically going to do 2 parts. The first part's going to be some analysis based on the 2 lists that I did, because it wasn't just lists. I did some data, assigned like tiers and points and stuff like that to episodes based on where they were, and that will tell us, like, just based on my lists, which has the higher quality of episodes, and it'll give us a kind of analytical version of Avatar vs Korra. Then I'll reveal which show I prefer and think is the best, so my opinion at the moment on it, and then I'll go through a variety of talking points addressing basically where that opinion came from, what are the key points with regards to both series for why I feel that way. So yeah, let's get into the analysis here. So this is where, once again, I would say I would suggest watching my last 2 big Avatar and Korra videos, which is the first one was the Korra episode ranking list, where I ranked all 52 episodes of Korra in my preference order and did some analysis, and then I did the same for Avatar with its 61 episodes and again did some analysis. So what you're going to see here is me taking some of that data. I'm not going to show you the lists from both shows because it's not particularly important here. It's more of the data from them, and that will tell us kind of what's going on here. Very quickly, how I made the list, which will inform you about where this comes from, is that I used a tier system where I placed every episode into a specific ranked tier and then ordered episodes within those tiers, and then when I placed the tiers in order, I had my full list. Specifically, I used these 6 tiers, where excellent was the best tier, very good was the second best tier, good was the third best tier, average was the 4th tier, below average was the 5th tier, and then the worst tier was bad. I think I use A, B, C, D, E, and F for just simplicity here to get across that that's what the grades are. And then if you're wondering what that means in terms of a rating out of 100, this is roughly what I mean. Any episode that got an excellent or an A grade is basically an episode I would rate as being 90, over 90 out of 100. So yeah. So let's quickly move on to some of the main analysis. So it comes from the fact that in those 2 videos, I assigned every episode a point score based on what tier or grade I gave it, and then I found the average point score per book, and then in this video we'll find the average point score per series. So here's how I did it. If an episode got an A or an excellent rating, it got 6 points, and then dropping 1 as it goes down each tier, to where if it only got a bad rating, it only got 1 point. So this will help us determine analytically how it worked. But first, this is an important one to get across as well. You probably saw these 2 separately in each of the last 2 videos, but the breakdown of basically how many episodes are in each tier for each series. So on the top, Legend of Korra, 11 episodes in the A grade, 11 excellent episodes, 23 very good episodes, 12 good episodes, 2 average episodes, 3 below average episodes, and 1 bad episode. Specifically, the points I'd want to make here would be, notice how in the top 3 tiers, where basically it's good or above, 88% of the series is in these tiers, and that means only 12% is in the weaker categories, with 44%, so a lot of episodes being in the very good category. Whereas for Avatar, you can see here 19 A grade episodes, 19 very good episodes, 14, 6 for D, 3 for E, and then none in the bad category. So number-wise, what that means is that actually it's a little bit lower, 85% in the strongest categories and 15 in the weaker categories. But again, of that 15, none of them are in the bad category. So it means it looks very close there just off the kind of basic analysis. But when we move into the actual, I suppose, conclusion type thing, here are the average points. So with Avatar, book 1 got an average of a 4.3, which if you go back to the grade rating things that I did, that means that is a like just above good average. So that's kind of like a low C average. Book 2 got a 4.8, which is a high C average. Book 3 got a 5.1, which is a low B average overall, because you get 5 points for being in the B or very good category, which means that Avatar's series average is a 4.73, whereas with Korra we have 4 books, but because we're taking an average, it still works. Book 1 with a 5.2, which is actually the highest of everything, but again, it has the lowest number of episodes, so that partly accounts for that, but still high quality. And book 2 has a 4.9, book 3 a 4.2, and book 4 a 4.4 for a series average of 4.66. So very clearly there, Avatar wins, but by a very small margin. Like, you have to go into like the second decimal point place to really find the difference, because otherwise if you just take the first round down to the first decimal point, they're both 4.7, but obviously different sides of the 7, if you take my meaning. And I think this is quite interesting that that's the way it ends up working out. It obviously speaks to the quality of both series, and as well as just the quality of both books. But going into the results, as I say here, Avatar comes out on top, but only by a small margin. It shows that on average, Korra's episode quality is on par to ATLA, but it doesn't account for, I suppose, how the show feels. The numbers only account for directly taking the show as individual scores, basically, for each of its 52 or 61 episodes. This is how it comes out, but it doesn't really account for how those episodes, regardless of their quality, really flow together, how the series feels as a whole, what my overall opinion is. And that's why I didn't just make this video just all about the analysis, that the opinion is where most of it's going to come from to basically explain those points. But just very quickly, before we go into that, let's really talk about why those scores are actually so similar. It's going to link into the first point I make when doing the analysis, but Korra has very few super low quality episodes. That's what you notice from the analysis. Only 12% of its episodes are in the lower tiers, and a lot of that is brought down by the fact that it has one bad episode, and that being Remembrances, if you watch the list, that being the kind of filler episode that had budget cuts, so it's by default, kind of has to be in a category of its own. But because Korra's seasons are so small, it means that it has to cram a lot into every single episode, whereas with Avatar, it actually has time to spread things out. So the episode scores being so similar, I think makes sense, because it's, I suppose, the difference between a packed show maybe not having enough time to get everything right versus a more stretched out show just using the fact that it's stretched out. And we'll get to that in just a second, but first of all, this is more about giving each series a fair analysis and seeing where the positives and negatives are, more so than simply a matter of me coming to this video and saying, boom, this one is the better, that's all you need. I don't think you get much out of this video if you just come in, skip to the end, find out that this series is my favorite, I think is the better one, and then comment about that. It's more about why do I feel that way rather than just the direct result. So with that in mind, let's just get which show I feel is the winner out of the way and kind of move on from there. So in my opinion, Avatar: The Last Airbender is the strongest show, and I don't think it's as close as the numbers suggest from before, 4.73 to 4.66. When I think about it, that number seems a little too close for how I actually feel about both series. But I definitely wouldn't really say that the shows are in like completely different like tiers or anything like that. I think it is close, but not that close. In that Korra is a fantastic show, and we'll discuss that like it has its positives as well. And it's not just this landslide victory for Avatar, but it's enough where enough stuff gets kind of piled against Korra that Avatar sort of has to be the winner because it's so much more solid. So that's what I say here. There are a few too many issues that make my choice of ATLA a somewhat easy one. So it's not just like instantaneous that like Avatar wins by default, but when you really think about it, it feels like it has to be that way. So the first main talking point that I want to get into here with regards to why this is the case is format. This is probably the central core that ultimately decided it for me. Whenever I think about comparing Avatar to Korra, this is the thing that immediately comes to mind for like why there is such a difference in both series. And fundamentally what I mean there is comparing these two talking points I have at the start. The idea of a stretched out series versus a compressed series. What I mean by that is that take away the execution of both shows currently and just look at what the story is actually about. Avatar has a fairly simple story of just master the four elements, a journey to master the four elements, and then confront the Fire Lord before a certain point in time. Side plots, new characters are introduced along the way to add depth, but fundamentally it's a very simple story told over a lot of episodes. So they have time to take side plots, time to just have episodes that are just about humor, just about like, here's this random character that we've just introduced who's not particularly important, but look how funny this character is, or something like that. And you can use episodes to just have character development, and you can sort of stay away from the main plot for a while, because it is such a large overall, plot of just get here, but within a year type thing. Whereas with Korra, you're telling 4 much more complicated stories, even by themselves, just with the nuance that you sort of need to tell the ideologies of those 4 villains. And you're trying to like compile them all together, one after the other, into a kind of cohesive character journey for your cast in less episodes. Like I say 61 to 52, but the episode count is more about each book here, because it is 4 separate stories, and there's not a massive amount of flow between each of them, in that, book 1 doesn't really set up a lot of stuff for book 2 to do, so book 2 kind of has to start and end its own plot. Book 3 doesn't really continue the spirit plot all that much. They're like there, but it's not a focus. Book 3 to 4, you do get a bit of comparison. Like between 2 and 3, of course, you get the harmonic convergence creates the airbenders, but like it's just a kind of direct continuation. The 3 to 4 is where you probably get the biggest one, which is Korra's injury going into book 4. But you can see that like there's not the hugest of linking between everything, and that we're not always coming back to what's happened before. So for the most part, it is 4 somewhat separate stories, with character development kind of being the one thing that carries through. And the way I describe it is just that they sort of miscalculate. The writers, I think, fundamentally miscalculated, and they tried to tell complicated stories in too few episodes. Like 12 for Amon's bender-non-bender conflict wasn't quite enough. Some of the explanations are a bit lacking at the end, and then I think it's fairly fair to say that they don't really tackle the bender-non-bender issue in a very upfront manner, in that the resolution by the end is just that, we've elected a non-bender president, and that solves everything. In that, I think the takeaway you're almost meant to take from book 1 is that, that was just the equalist kind of like rousing up some negative opinion. For the most part, no one really felt that the benders were doing anything that crazy, in that it was just the likes of Tarlok who were kind of giving all benders a kind of bad name. Book 2 I actually feel is probably the most complete. Conveniently, it has the most episodes, and so, Bolin gets an arc, Mako gets an arc, Korra has a big arc, Tenzin has an arc. You get time to spend with the likes of like Iki gets an episode, Jinora obviously gets focus, Kaya and Bumi get some time, like Varric is introduced. While not all of these side plots are the most interesting and best, like the only few things you'd maybe say are underdeveloped, or like Asami's plot sort of like falls out of the series, but I think that's mainly because the writers realized that there wasn't a lot to do with her, full stop. So they kind of transitioned that to being more Varric versus Mako type stuff and incorporating Bolin more into it. And then maybe like Unalaq, like all of the villains, like Unalaq in terms of backstory could use probably explaining how he first met Vatu. But for the most part it's fine. It's book 3 and 4 where I really feel this comes to the forefront, where there's just far too many things in both of these books where, like I say, my second point there for Korra, too many times where more time was needed to flesh things out, leading to a series feeling lacking in a few areas. So for book 3, it's just that the villains are barely characters. It feels like a harsh thing to say, but that is the case. Like, what do we know about Ghazan? What do we know about Minghua? What do we know about Pali outside of that super vague backstory of how she met Zahir? Even Zahir, who you think gets more development, but in the end, no. Like, most of his talking is just about the ideology of the Red Lotus more so than himself personally. To the point where, like, if we didn't have that, like, description on the Nick.com website that, like, he was a warrior poet, I think we'd just be missing a fundamental, like, idea of just what we're meant to take from his character. And just they didn't do the Red Lotus stuff particularly well. And it's a very packed book because you're trying to have a Lin and Su plot by introducing Zhao Fu. You're trying to sort of have this like freedom world leaders thing, and Korra's not really involved in it. Like, Zahir's ideals never challenge Korra, in that Korra is just there to sort of be like a kidnap victim for most of the book. Again, a harsh way of saying it, but fundamentally that's the case. She immediately disagrees with Zahir, and they're just enemies, and it takes away some of the nuance from what most of the books like were trying to do, in that you have such a clear villain who is like killing people. Action is great, but like there's not enough time for everything. No backstory on 4 whole characters, no backstory on a whole organization. The time they do try and say it, it's told to us, not shown. And especially stuff like the first time they attempted to kidnap Korra, why they're in prison in the first place. Why was that not shown? Too many moments like that where it's just like, compared to what you used the episodes for, like, what were you actually doing? And that, like, did you really think you could tell such a complex story in this small amount of time? And it's the exact same with book 4. Kuvira is not fleshed out well enough. The whole she and Su Yin are meant to be this sort of adopted mother-daughter relationship doesn't come across at all, even though they mention it a couple of times. It's a case of being told and not shown about her whole leaving of Zhao Fu, and that's, I think, one of the most shocking things in the entire show. That you immediately exclude this key couple of scenes that are meant to define the Beifong's feelings about Kuvira, why they're so upset, explain Batar's kind of betrayal of the family, and he's the one who badly needs character development, explain Kuvira and Batar's relationship and how it started, because even by the end you're kind of confused about, like, was there ever anything there between them, or was she just using him? And it's not particularly clear. They're trying to ride the line between both, like, she needed him and she cared about him versus she just needed his skills. And it's just the entire thing of just like Kuvira, like, given that we knew her in book 3 and she was just on the hero side, she saves Tonraq. How did all this like evil stuff come in? It's the, I think, worst explained like villain heel turn of the entire show. Whereas I think to a degree you can understand all of the other ones, but not her specifically. And while like Korra's arc is particularly well done, there's with book 4 especially stuff like Janora suddenly falls out of like being particularly important. Like Kai is not really in the book all that much, and like little things like that, like some of the relationships that they'd set up in the previous book don't get all that much time, and you come to the end and it's a satisfying enough ending, but in a lot of key areas they just didn't quite get it right. Versus Avatar and its stretched out series, where, as I said, a simple story, they've got episodes to just do what they want with. And if there's a negative to Avatar, it's that, like, okay, book 1 doesn't use the format particularly well. That's very fair to say. Book 1 only has probably like 8 important episodes, and the other ones aren't really massively necessary. There's some solid character stuff in them, but the idea is, going back to like the episode quality ranking from before, the reason why Avatar is so low down is because so many of those book 1 episodes like are in the good or average tier. And it's because that was the max potential for those episodes. And it's a positive and a negative about Avatar, that it was willing to do episodes that could only ever get to that level. Whereas with Korra, it's trying to be very good or excellent in every episode. But issues, lack of time, drag episodes down to being in the good tier and so on. In that there's a much higher potential for Korra that it didn't quite hit. Whereas the thing with Avatar is that it ultimately fulfilled basically all of its potential, and it feels so complete by the end. And there's very few things, as we'll get to in the other talking points, that feel underdeveloped by the end of the series. And that's what I say there, like mid-book 1, more focus was needed, and that there's a clear point for like an extra subplot to be added in there. Similar to, maybe not as big in scope as the Ba Sing Se plot from book 2, but something along those lines was just kind of missing. But that's what's, I think, ultimately very telling here, in that format you'd think would relate completely clearly to the episode quality thing. But the episode quality is very close, but on format, it's Avatar's biggest victory, mainly because Korra gets it sort of wrong. And I think the biggest talking point here is, in a way, Mike and Brian initially wanted Avatar to be like 13 episode seasons. They wanted to have these smaller seasons to tell the story in that way. Yet, thinking about that now, it's kind of like, no, Avatar needs all of those episodes. Like, there's very few where you just say, get rid of them. As much as some of them aren't the most interesting, there's very few you'd say just completely get rid of. And so, when they got what they wanted in Korra, you see the flaw of doing it that way. And maybe this is just a personal thing for me, but I will always say, I would much rather a show over-explain something to me than under-explain something to me. In terms of like, okay, if you need 2 episodes to explain a concept to me, but explain it like well, but maybe you've gone too far, that's fine, over you just like spending 2 minutes to like really, really basic explain something to me, and there not be enough information there to go on. That's the way I am with things. That's my personal preference for stuff. I'd much rather get a big explanation than like no explanation, or the smallest of explanation. And that's where a lot of my show don't tell stuff comes in that it just feels a little lazy at certain points to make such important stuff just be like a line of dialogue rather than an actual sequence. Because where's Korra at its strongest? In moments like Skeletons in the Closet, where you have that 7-minute backstory for Amon and then Noatok and Tarlok, that's one of the best like sequences in the show, and it's a flashback sequence. Like, it's just a matter of like using stuff effectively. Similarly, the like Tonraq Unalaq flashback, where you kind of see that like, oh, like this is what he did to gain power. That's an important flashback because we saw it. That wouldn't have as much impact if we were just told that. And imagine if they'd taken the approach in book 1 and just had Tarlok just say a couple of things and not see any of it. It would have been a real negative. Next talking point is character development, which again, Avatar takes this, I think. And this is one where it's a little bit closer here, but it's a case of, look at the second and third point there. Asami and Mako. 2 of the main cast that were poorly used. Asami, because I just felt that the writers never had an idea what to do with her, especially outside of her father. Her key moments always relate to her father, and it's always that duo, and it was never really her on her own. In book 2, she had an opportunity, but they sort of had to move her away from it because it had to be more about Mako and Varric, just because she wasn't the most interesting character. And then book 3 and 4, again, not much use for her outside of the Hiroshi stuff towards the end. But on Korra's side of things, Korra, Bolin, Tenzin, as like main characters, did get strong arcs. Korra and Tenzin especially, but I think it's fair to include Bolin there as well, because maybe book 1 he didn't have a lot going on, but book 2, 3, and 4, they gave him something important in each of them that led him to a better place. Similarly with some of the more minor characters, like Jinora had a very strong like transition from like minor to sort of main character. Unfortunately, book 4 let that down a little bit. Opal, when she was introduced, was a very strong character who I thought they did strong development with. Lynn, I thought they did well about like not overusing her, but when they did use her, some really strong moments in like book 1 and book 3. And then Kai was also another character like that, but it is let down by the fact that the likes of Mako was just really poorly used, and I specifically word it that way, where like just badly used by the writers, like blaming him for the romance stuff and him just not being used in like book 3 and 4 all that well. Whereas with Avatar, you can see here most of the main cast, Aang, Zuko, Katara, Sokka, great development. I'd say of the main characters, only Toph didn't quite get as much development, and that's because they never came back in the show to the whole I want to like reunite, sort of apologize to my parents arc. They left that for the comics, but at the time they didn't know the comics were a thing, so it was just an open plot point within the series, and so it was a bit of a problem. And then again, minor characters like Suki, Iroh, Hakoda, and like again, it's a different format of a series. So like you're taking characters who were like from the 4th episode, bringing them into the 2nd season. They did that very well, and even like one-shot characters along the way were well done. Like Chit Sang was only around for a while, but like they used him well within the Boiling Rock and the little bit afterwards. So, you know, as I say here in the kind of summary at the end, it's just this character development is where the strength of Avatar and Korra are. But Avatar does it better because more characters get strong development, and with Korra it only feels like a small group of them did, in that like you could probably maybe take Tenzin out of that and it's like Korra and Tenzin get the arcs. Bolin kind of did, not the other characters not so much. So next one is romance, and again this is going to be a big one, and I think what you're noticing here is that Avatar is like winning, but it's kind of winning in a way because Korra's not getting it right. It's not because like Avatar is just like doing things like so much better, because fundamentally they're written by the same team, so when they do things well, they're on similar levels, and you can see that Korra has like a higher potential in a way because of the complexity of its plots and stuff like that. But it's just Avatar doing things solid, well, and not really making many mistakes is winning out over Korra, which is maybe shooting for the stars but missing, and you know, too many negatives are coming up. So with Avatar, I'd always say that like the romance was pretty naturally done. They didn't like force it in, they didn't focus on it like a ton, and they emphasized sort of the connection between the characters, that like Aang and Katara's relationship was this important thing, that May was important to Zuko, that their relationship meant something to both characters and affected them going forward. May's betrayal of Azula was informed by her relationship to Zuko, and Zuko took a bit of inspiration from that, and so on. And similarly, like Sokka's relationships, like Yue initially, and how what happened with the Yue relationship impacted his relationship with Suki afterwards, and had to get past that, and you know, so on. It didn't take away or distract from other things going on, and just kind of added something to the series. Because with romance, I know a lot of people just hate it in shows. I'm always like a proponent of like, I'm okay with it. I want it to be there, but I want it to be there and a little bit like focused on. In that, I get frustrated a little bit when they do the classic sort of tease a romance for like an entire series, and then maybe just towards the end, like it happens. Like it's similar to what happens with Katang, but I feel with Katang they were a little bit more like, this is literally only not happening because of the war. Like we're this close to it happening, and then because the comics do it so well, it had the payoff I kind of wanted. The problem with Korra, given that I wanted romance, was that they just did the worst thing possible, and that is have romance, but basically have it present in the series in a slightly bigger way, just to focus on romance between the characters. Drama between the characters. So Asami, Mako, Korra, Bolin kind of love squared thing going on here. And while in book 1 I don't think it's like terribly done, it's still drama central. Book 2, it's really, really badly done. They did improve in book 3 and 4 with the likes of Bolin and Opal, Kai and Jinora, Varric and Julie. But then afterwards, like once they kind of got it right, they just didn't focus on them at all. So there was definitely some frustrations here, but like book 1 and 2, they didn't quite get it right. And then, again, one of the biggest impact results from this is that characters like Mako were just... It was made into his defining thing as a character that... Hey, here's this guy who had like 2 failed relationships. Like, let's make fun of him after this for this. Even though, like, Korra is probably to blame for a lot of that stuff, more so than Mako. So, there's that. And, like, as I said there, Avatar is better than Korra here. You know, Korra was way too focused on the drama between the main characters, which took away from actually just caring about, you know, the romance, the connection between the characters. And with Avatar, it just feels a little bit more natural and well developed, even though it's less of a kind of factor in the series. So again, another case of Avatar just doing something solid, but doing it well, versus Korra trying to do something, but not quite getting it right. Here, Spirit World / lore is something that Korra actually gets the victory on. I'd say Korra does this better. And the thing is here with Avatar, it's a really interesting aspect, because like Avatar of course deserves a lot of credit for introducing a lot of the base lore, but when it came to the spirit world especially, they really didn't do it any favors. Like 107 being the introduction of the spirit world in an episode where we do not see the spirit world, in an episode where it is Aang's spirit outside of his body in the physical world, and we only properly kind of know that as of the explanation because of Korra explaining this sort of stuff with how they did it there, and that like, oh, Janora's astral projection technique was just her moving her spirit outside of her body but in this physical world. That makes sense. And it's just like there's an element of like Korra, the follow-up series, like fixing like the introduction of the spirit world. And then even anytime they used it, it always felt like they didn't really have the biggest of plans for like how exactly it was meant to work in Avatar, in that anytime they needed a spirit, it was always something like really big. It was always a big spirit. And they never gave us the greatest sense of like, okay, this is a spirit world. The Avatar is meant to be the bridge between the spirit and the physical world, but like, how is this the case if there's only like a couple of spirits and they're all like super powerful? And so Korra just kind of getting into that idea of like, no. There are important spirits, but there are also just like normal spirits. There's a spirit that looks like a carrot. There's just these small little butterfly spirits. It is a whole world filled with spirits. And that's why there's an importance of being the bridge between the world, because it's actually trying to bridge this gap between 2 completely different species. And that's why the beginning's backstory was so well done at establishing that like they used to sort of be together, but there was issues and they had to be forced apart by Wan, and here's Korra trying to bring them back together. In that the whole bridge between the worlds thing didn't really feel fleshed out until Korra really addressed that like the human spirit conflict is actually a notable thing. So as I say here in the last point for Avatar, credit for doing certain elements, like introducing so much of it well. But at the same time, it was fairly vague. They didn't really have the full plan in place at this point in time. And Korra greatly expands on all of this, doesn't really contradict anything, and Beginnings becomes this masterpiece of world building. And it's as I say here, the central core of how we now understand so much about the Avatar world. You know, the spirit portals, how humans got bending, how the Avatar works, like book 2 in general, like physically going into the spirit world versus meditating in there, and the difference between it, the fact that a human can become a spirit like Iroh over time and stuff like that. And the thing as well with that, large explanations, but they linked it all into the story in that book 2 is about spirits, so Korra learning all of that stuff made sense because it informed her heading into like the final battles and stuff like that. So Korra does this better because it's more consistent. I'll always say that Avatar, like when people say that like Korra contradicted Avatar, it'll always be like what did Avatar set up to like be contradicted? It was like vague about almost everything. They never really set up any rules for how this sort of stuff worked. But anyway, villains is another point that I think actually Korra gets the victory on. And I think what you'll notice here with these 2 points that Korra wins is that Avatar's fairly close to it. Like in the other ones for Avatar winning, Avatar kind of won in a bit of a landslide. Here it's much closer because Avatar has Azula, in that she is the main complex villain. Like Zhao plays his role well for what he is, but he's only so interesting because he's just a Fire Nation commander character. Similarly, Ozai is a good like final boss type character as a major threat from the end of the series, but I think we were probably introduced to him far too late, and we don't really get his character development coming out all that much. To the point where I'd say, like, in the comics, he is a much, much more interesting character than he is in the show. Because the show doesn't really present him as a character for the most part. Stuff like Ozai's relationship with his brother Iroh not really being explained is, I think, a bit of a problem. But, you know, it's not a huge issue. It's just that, like, imagine how things would have gone if we did know Ozai a little bit better. With Korra, though, we get 4 great, different villains, you know, focused on a specific ideology, and they have a full book to basically have the spotlight to themselves. Now, unfortunately, this is where the format, the lack of episodes, the lack of development for certain characters comes in that I feel that definitely Amon and Unalaq are much more developed than Zahir and Kuvira, but still, you can sort of get behind all of them in their own way, depending on how you feel about the specific ideologies. Some people think Unalaq is really boring. I really like him because he is the spiritual villain, and how the whole book is about him wanting the world to be more spiritual, and no one sort of feeling the exact same way as he does, and especially with like his brother being not spiritual and so on. It adds a lot of complexity to it, whereas like I personally don't really ever really buy into Zahir and what he's saying, because like the general freedom doesn't really feel like a great ideology because most people believe in that. And then like taking out the world leaders, he just feels far too much like he's a terrorist, and not in the sort of way where like based on certain presentation you can sort of get behind a character who's like that if they're actually trying to change something that you feel is like really, really, really wrong. And it doesn't really feel that way. And the fact that, like, I don't really feel like he teaches Korra anything until book 4. And at that point, it's more about, like, Zahir has developed since he's been in prison, and he helps Korra because they both don't like Kuvira and what she's doing. So, you know, there's different levels of stuff, but I'll give Korra the victory here because, you know, the likes of Amon, the likes of Unalaq really own their book. And the complexity at play here, the fact that they all challenge Korra in their own way, works out so well. And like as I say here, like Azula ends up being the only Avatar villain with like depth. I don't include Zuko here because ultimately I think from episode 3 you pretty much realized he wasn't a full-on villain. But you know, I'll give Korra the victory here just because of that. So let's get in here, main negatives. So this is sort of a sum up in a way of everything, but there's also a few extra points in here. And I do this because if I did main positives, I'd be talking for the rest of the videos about all the positives of both series. So instead, let's focus on the negatives, where there's not going to be as many because I love both series. So let's focus on Avatar. Avatar won this thing, but what are its main negatives? So book 1 is considerably weaker than the other books. I think that is the very fair point. That is far and away the biggest point. The biggest negative about Avatar is that, yeah, book 1 is much weaker than the others. Because, as I said, there's only probably about 8, maybe 9 important episodes. Everything else are episodes that are fine for what they do, but they could have done more if they had an actual, I suppose, side plot at play here. Which links into the second point. Aang learning waterbending easily was a huge missed opportunity for a strong arc. And that's because while he fundamentally does end up in a way learning all of the elements somewhat easily, the gap between him trying to learn firebending made for something interesting, and then just the severe difference in attitude between who Aang was versus what he needed for earthbending made it somewhat strong. Him learning waterbending like that, easier than Katara, it was a huge, I think, missed opportunity. And this is where, like I've said it before, I haven't really seen anyone like kind of present a good point for why this maybe isn't a good point. But like, I think the Last Airbender movie does this better. Aang learning waterbending is so much better done in the Last Airbender movie, because they link the loss of Aang's people into his waterbending. Because waterbending, you need to have your emotions flow. So they have Aang actually, in the movie, take longer to accept the loss of his people. And they link him having that acceptance with him fully connecting with waterbending. And they kind of suggest that, like, okay, he knows martial arts, so he's adapting to learning, like, the techniques correctly, but he's not really, using waterbending as easily as he is his other elements, like, in this case, air. And so when he tries to kind of break free, you can see there's so much power there, the potential for him to be an amazing bender, but he's being held back by the emotions surrounding the loss of his people. And that's why, the big final thing with the wave is, Avatar stayed plus just him using waterbending powerfully for the first time, and it works. And I'm not saying you do things exactly the same way as the movie, but just that link of loss of his people to the emotion of learning waterbending should have been hit on in the show in some sort of a way. I would really, really like that. Similarly, Toph's main arc is left unresolved by the end of the show. I think this is a pretty big thing. The whole idea of, like, fundamentally Toph's main arc is the blind bandit and, like, a little bit in the runaway. Like, everything else is like, okay, she learns metal bending, little bits of character development here. It's her having friends for the first time is kind of her arc as such. But her core character arc was always the thing with her parents. They just thought she was weak because of her disability, but she was actually stronger because of it, and they couldn't see her that way, so she had to run away. Then in The Runaway, she sends the letter. She realizes over the course of her journey that she probably did hurt her parents by leaving like that, but that she was right to go with Team Avatar to help. So she gets, Katara to help her write the letter to send back. We don't really see the result of that. And I think even in the Rift, like, they don't really reference the Hawk, but they resolve the relationship with her father. So I think there was an opportunity in the show to have something with this. Open this plot up at the end of just, like, Toph's parents being at the celebration at the end. Something along those lines to just suggest something. Similarly, the Ursa tease at the end, I think, is a negative looking back on the series, because there was no obvious path at the time to get that story. The whole movie rumor thing at the time, like, there was no concrete evidence that was a thing right then at that point in time. The search wasn't a thing right now. It obviously is now. But, like, ending a series like this with a tease of such an important thing, like, what was the point of that? I think it is the problem. So, to me, they're the main negatives with Avatar. And, like, it's one pretty big one, with book one being fairly weak, and then a lot of other little character moment things. But with Korra, it's everything added up. Romance most of the time was poorly done. Many elements, especially book 3 and 4, left underdeveloped. Main characters like Asami and Mako, Asami just underutilized. Did they have any idea what to do with her? And then with Mako, the writers sort of sidelining him, like, really going from being, like, pretty much like the secondary main character to Korra to being, like, the fourth main character or something like that, and just not being used well in book 3 and 4. And then I think there's just a lot of other things, like that second point there, many elements left underdeveloped. That is so many different things. And so that's the summary I have here is, with ATLA book 1, it's far and away the weakest book. Opportunity to do so much more. Other than that, a few things at the end that I wish were resolved. With Korra, missed opportunities too many places. Your characters not used or developed well enough, plots not explained well enough. But it had huge potential. Korra had huge potential. It could have been probably better than Avatar. Imagine all of these plots, these intricate plots with these intricate villains, were fleshed out well enough. The characters were used a bit better than they were. I think you are talking about two very even shows. This discussion becomes a lot harder if Korra gets these problems solved. But it didn't. And that's why Avatar gets the victory here. And that's, in going into final thoughts here, with Avatar, it's a truly classic show. Always going to be remembered as one of the greats. So well paced. There's only a handful of issues, which is basically summing up what I said before, and just so solid throughout. As much as there's issues with book 1, once you get through book 1, book 2 and 3 are just such an amazing ride of strong episodes. With Korra, when it was good, it was amazing. It really could have challenged Avatar if it had executed some of its things correct. But as I've said many times in this video, too many things underdeveloped. Here's just a small list. Asami, Mako, Kuvira, Suyin, Zahir, Pali, Gazan, Minghua, and so on. Romance has always been a frustrating element, especially in the early books. Not as much in the second two books, but it's mainly because they used it in small parts, but didn't use it enough, almost, in a way. So Avatar is a stronger series because it had time to develop nearly everything. With Korra, there are too many things that didn't get the focus needed. I don't think there's any inherent problem with Korra, just a lack of episodes for the scope of the story that they actually had. And yeah, so in conclusion, as I say here, Avatar is the better show. But what I'm not trying to get at is that Korra is bad in any way. Both are really strong shows. And me saying Avatar is better is not trying to say that Korra doesn't have any strengths. It absolutely does. And I'll always say with these type of things is just that we should just be happy that in our franchise, our favorite franchise as Avatar fans, we have two great shows that are relatively close in quality. Even if we can clearly choose one of them as being the winner, the better show, we shouldn't just obliterate the other show just because it's not as good as Avatar. Because what are we actually doing here? We are saying that Korra is not as good as potentially one of the best shows of all time. Is that a heavy criticism? Not really. That's just saying it's very good, but it doesn't quite match the level of one of the all-time greats, and that's nothing to really be overly frustrated about. And I just finish off by saying we have to be able to be fair to both shows, acknowledge that Avatar has its flaws as well, and Korra has strengths as a show, even if we can still at the same time acknowledge that Avatar is the better show fairly easily. And that's what I feel like in terms of when I've seen discussion on this. I think it's been a little too heavy-handed against Korra, dismissing it as if it's just terrible, when it has its strengths. It really does. And just saying stuff like Korra's book 4 arc, beginnings, Amon's backstory, just book 1 in general. There's a reason book 1 is my highest ranked, on average, book 1 air, highest ranked on average book of the entire series with a 5.2. Some of those moments are incredible. Tarlok revealed to be a bloodbender. That was an incredible moment. The fandom's reaction when that happened. Then, just an episode later, Tarlok being taken out by Amon when you think Tarlok has suddenly taken the main villain seat. All those shocking reveals in book 1 were great. The lore reveals from book 2, the fights in book 3, Korra's development in book 4. Korra is a good show, and I get some people may not like it, but to say that it's terrible is something I can't really agree with. And the whole point of this video was to get across that, look, there are positives and negatives for both shows. It's just that Avatar, you have to say, is the more solid show overall. So that's this video. That's pretty much everything I wanted to say come the end of this rewatch. And again, this was a general video. I was talking generally about shows, not getting into too many specifics. If you want to know my thoughts on individual episodes, as part, like, this is meant to be the sum up of all the videos that have come before, you can go back and watch my rewatch videos for Avatar. I have one for every episode. Rewatch videos for Korra, again, one for every episode. And then there's the 2 Avatar and Korra episode ranking list videos. If you want to see how I rank the Avatar episodes, how I rank the Korra episodes, they're all present there. So I'll link the 2 playlists, the Avatar rewatch playlist, the Korra rewatch playlist, and I'll individually link the 2 videos before this one, which are the 2 episode ranking lists. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What for you are the key moments, the key topics that decide for you if Avatar or Korra is the better series? What are your thoughts on what I had to say here? But yeah, other than that, thanks for watching. Especially thank you to anyone who watched all the videos in this series. It's been a really, really long journey, especially these last 3 videos. Like, they took a long time to make, but I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. And yeah, we can get back into doing normal discussion videos, discussing the news that it comes out. I suppose San Diego Comic-Con's coming up shortly. We'll see if anything happens there. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.